Any teacher has the potential to have a student with an auditory impairment assigned as a member of their class. The design of this professional development provides an overview of the terms, supports, and services that surround a student identified with an auditory impairment. Specifics as to the unique needs of the individual child will be discussed at their ARD meeting or at their Section 504 meeting during the planning and preparation process. The purpose of this presentation is an introduction to foundational information about auditory impairments. The vocabulary used to describe a hearing loss or an individual with a hearing loss varies depending on the community or the setting in which the conversation takes place. Some words have specific meanings based on the legal, educational, medical, or cultural community context of the conversation. Throughout this presentation, the selection of words focus on the educational setting and the educational laws governing student support systems. During this presentation, the term auditory impairment will be used as an umbrella term that identifies multiple categories and levels of hearing loss. Specifically defined terms include hearing impairment, deafness, and deaf or hard of hearing. Remember, the term auditory impairment will serve as that umbrella term under which you will find specifically defined terms that identify the levels of students and their hearing loss. When speaking of an individual with a disability, it is important that we always speak of them as a person first. You will hear the phrase such as a student with or an individual with, and then you will hear the condition or the identifying disability that follows. We have to remember that we are all people first, and then we have uniquenesses that set us aside or make us different from one another. According to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, there are 13 categories of disabilities for students who may be served through special education. 3 of those categories identify a level of hearing impairment that our students may experience. We are going to be discussing 2 of those categories in this presentation. Deafness. Deafness is a hearing impairment so severe that a child is impaired in processing linguistic information through hearing, with or without amplification, which adversely affects the child's educational performance. Hearing impairment. An impairment in hearing, whether permanent or fluctuating, adversely affects the child's educational performance, but is not included under the definition of deafness. You see how we have to look at both of those definitions together in order to understand the level of disability that the child may be experiencing. Each state applies the federal law to the rules and regulations that are given as mandates for the way that we provide services within the educational system. The Texas Education Code, Chapter 30, Subchapters C and D, Sections 30.051 and Sections 30.81 identifies that when referring students who may attend the Texas School for the Deaf or the Regional Day School for the Deaf, we are to use the term deaf or hard of hearing. However, when it comes to identification for special education eligibility, the federal terms are what are required for use. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 protects the civil rights of students with disabilities. Provision of the supports and services in the educational setting address the specific diagnosis. In Section 504 record, the individual condition noted in the evaluation for eligibility uses the term provided by the treating professional. For a general categorization of condition in the record, the term auditory impairment is marked to encompass any of the terms associated with hearing acuity disabilities. According to most resources that attempt to divide the terms, identification of a student with an auditory impairment use the general demarcation between hearing impairment and deafness at the 90 decibel level. Teachers need to be aware that no 2 hearing losses are the same. No 2 audiograms, tests that demonstrate what the sound level an individual can and cannot hear, are the same. Some students show significant losses on the audiogram, yet functionally perform as if the loss is at a lesser level. Others show milder losses, yet function as if they are more severe. Identification and planning involves a complex set of assessments beyond the medical diagnostics. Experts in the educational field will be working with the team to assess and evaluate specific needs for communication and for learning. The general education teacher is a part of that process. A student with a diagnosis of an auditory impairment using any of the aforementioned terms may be eligible for services through one of the federal programs for students with disabilities. A student with an auditory impairment may need a referral to special education for extensive assessment and review of documentation by an audiologist and a teacher for students with auditory impairments. If a student meets the basic eligibility requirements and there is data-based demonstration of need for specially designed instruction through an individualized educational program, this will be created through special education. Students who do not meet the IDEIA eligibility requirements may be appropriately served with a 504 plan to address accommodations because they do not need specially designed instruction. It is a team of individuals with expertise in the area of disability, classroom teachers, and other personnel who are knowledgeable about the child who will make the decision based on evaluation and performance data. This graphic identifies the bodies of students within the general enrollment who may have an identified condition. Students requiring supports and services receive it either through Section 504 or through IDEIA, which is special education. Section 504 identifies the accommodations which the student needs in order to have equitable access to instruction in the general education classroom. This may include, but is not limited to, amplification devices and instructional considerations tailored to the student with an auditory impairment. If specially designed instruction is required for the student to access the curriculum and instruction, special education may become the foundational program to support the student based on their disability. Whether students are supported through special education or through Section 504, there are several general considerations that need to be looked at as accommodations that could be put into the classroom. Not all students need all accommodations, but these are some general ideas in a list that could be a part of your discussions. Consider these as general guidelines for individuals with a hearing loss, regardless of their age. Daily listening checks for personal hearing equipment and FM equipment, if it is in use, is required. Seat the student near the teacher. The second row, a bit off-center to the teacher's most frequent zone of instruction, may be a good place to start. It's important that they have a full face view away from the potential sources of noise within the classroom. Segregate known potential noise sources within the same area of the room and do not place the student near that area. Preferential and flexible seating. Allow the student to move to another seat, chair, or place in the room that will allow him or her to see clearly as the classroom activities change. The students will be using many visual cues and need to have access to that ability. Regularly check for understanding throughout the day and through open-ended questions. Just asking a yes or no question will not give you the feedback that you need. Be sure to always gain the attention of the student before speaking. Keep the classroom doors or windows closed to minimize noise that may interfere with your teaching and with their learning. Adhere to a classroom routine. If a student misses something, they will be better able to predict what they should be doing or what will happen next if you have a routine in place. Maintain a quiet classroom during lecture times and discussions when the expectation is for the students to understand the presented information. The list continues. There are many things that we need to consider when we're not able to access the hearing in the classroom at the same levels that one would typically expect. The instructional environment depends heavily on receiving information through auditory channels, making these considerations very important to an individual with an auditory impairment. Our list continues with copies of lecture notes. An advanced copy allows students with a hearing loss to focus on the instruction. Unlike children without hearing loss, listening while taking notes at the same time is often not possible. During classroom discussions, ask students to speak only one at a time. Repeat their questions and the answers of other students during group discussion. Summarize key points that are made by other students that may be essential for the student with the auditory impairment to understand. You may want to establish a buddy system in which another student repeats directions or helps the individual get started on the work at their desks. It's important to respect both parties when we are going to use an accommodation such as this. Remember, not every student is going to need these accommodations, but in some cases, a system like this could be beneficial for a student. Pre-teach vocabulary and emphasize critical information or key concepts. Recognize that the student may need to turn to watch others as they speak or to gather visual cues, especially if directions or conversations were difficult to hear. Write all assignments on the board, including textbook page numbers, as used during the lesson period. Provide visual communication supports, including caption films and visual schedules. Allow the student time to view and process both auditory and visual input. It may take more wait time on your part as a teacher. Monitor student for signs of fatigue and provide breaks from listening and watching. Functioning with a hearing loss, even with appropriate amplification, can be exhausting for the child. A student may need special education services in addition to general accommodations. Questions the team may ask include: what is the significance or impact of the hearing loss with regard to involvement and progress in the general education curriculum? What is the child's language and mode for direct communication with peers and professional personnel? What is the student's full range of needs, including the opportunity for direct instruction in the child's language and communication mode? Is there a need for assistive technology devices and services? The committee discusses all of these questions as they make decisions and determinations about what services are most appropriate for each individual child. Within the scope of special education is the requirement for students with auditory impairments to have IEP goals and specially designed instruction in the expanded core curriculum for students with auditory impairments. The expanded core curriculum, often seen with the initials ECC, includes developmental benchmarks in knowledge and skills that are specialized based on the identified impairment. For students with auditory impairments, areas such as audiology, career education, communication, family education, functional skills, self-determination and advocacy, social-emotional skills, and use of technology are emphasized. It is the role of the teacher with auditory impairments to ensure that the expanded core curriculum is implemented for the student. The Northeast Independent School District employs professionals specifically to work with students identified through special education with auditory impairments. Currently, Dr. Ann Elizabeth Jacobson, Doctor of Audiology, provides audiological assessments, analysis, and recommendations for specific supports needed for students with hearing loss in order to access instruction. Although hired through special education, she also provides professional recommendations for students evaluated through Section 504. The cluster campuses identified for the Regional Day School programs for the deaf hire 2 specialized categories of paraprofessionals. Licensed interpreters for the deaf translate the spoken word into sign language. Interpreters do not provide direct instruction or instructional support, but serve solitarily as a communication translation support. Instructional paraprofessionals who have skills in sign language assist directly with students during instruction. They operate as any instructional assistant would. However, their skill in using sign language sets them apart for this special assignment. Teachers with specific certification to teach students with auditory impairments either manage specially designed instruction in one of the cluster campuses for the Regional Day School program or have an itinerant assignment to provide services for those students with auditory impairments who are included in the general education setting on their geographically zoned campus. One of these teachers also provides early childhood education for students from birth to age 3, as the federal law requires districts to begin educational services at birth for students identified with auditory impairments. District Central Office personnel who are responsible for planning, implementation, and evaluation of the program include one of the directors for special education. Jan Greer DeHaven, that would be me, fulfills this responsibility. A special education program coordinator, Sandi Alcazar, oversees the administration of the program. supported by Clotie Jackson, who is our instructional specialist in the area of auditory impairments. At least one of the speech and language pathologists serving the district is assigned to work with students with auditory impairments. This individual has a specialty focus in the area. Finally, the general education classroom teacher is a key member of the instructional team. Students on your roster who have an accommodation, specialized support systems, interpreters, or possibly co-teachers are a part of the school community. The general education classroom teacher is an essential team member. As with every specialized area, there are vocabulary words with which one must become familiar. A few of the terms that are frequently used will be outlined on the next few slides. American Sign Language, often known as ASL, is a unique unspoken language using signs made with the hands and expressions on the face to communicate in conceptual conversation. Signing Exact English, also known as SEE or C, differs as a signed communication method that mirrors the word order of English and includes grammatical additions to words. This language best communicates vocabulary and academic instruction that is equitable to the spoken word. Total communication encompasses a method of using combinations of communication modes, sign, spoken word, pictures, symbols, and other possibilities, to support student language, learning, and communication. Vocabulary associated with some of the supports and accommodations includes the term personal hearing aids. These are small devices usually purchased by the family to amplify sound as it passes into the ear canal. Cochlear implant devices are small electronic devices consisting of both an external and surgically implanted portion that provide a sense of sound to one who is deaf or hard of hearing. A classroom sound field is an amplification system that benefits the entire area in which it is placed. An example in our district is the Lightspeed system that is installed in many of our classrooms. A sound field tower is a portable loudspeaker set up as an amplifier near the student needing support. Ear-level sound support is an amplification system programmed to interact directly with the personal hearing aids to support greater clarity of the individual speaking into the microphone. These are not the only terms that are used in the discussions about a student who has an auditory impairment, but they're a good place to start in learning the glossary. When making decisions about students who have disabilities, conversations concerning the least restrictive environment are foundational. Requirements in the federal law state that student services, to the extent possible, are alongside their peers and with the general curriculum. For example, participating at one's home campus with accommodations in general education classrooms is a less restrictive environment, whereas placement at the regional cluster campus or even the Texas State School is more restrictive. All along the continuum of possible services, illustrated with the horizontal arrow on this slide, are several support systems that could be within the classroom or provided in short-term pull-out settings. Every school district is required to provide a full continuum of services in order to meet both the letter and the spirit of the law for students with disabilities. Students with disabilities do need supports that may set them apart from their peers. However, the ARD carefully considers the degree to which this happens. It is the accommodations, goals, objectives, supports, and services designed uniquely for each student that drives the placement decisions. An IEP may indicate the need for direct instruction or for consultative supports. There are guiding principles that have been provided by the professionals in order to help the ARD committee make these types of decisions. Generally speaking, direct instructional support is provided for a student with an auditory impairment when academic performance, language skills, and listening skills are significantly below those of their peers. When self-understanding and advocacy skills related to personal hearing needs are just emerging or developing, direct instruction may be in line. Often, poor class participation and attention occur due to the interference of the impairment. In this case, direct instruction may be needed. When documentation, in medical reports, and notes in academic performance indicate that there has been a change in the degree of loss, more direct services may be needed. When students are young and just beginning to learn the languages that are used for communication and instruction, direct instruction may be what they need. Consultative supports may be the recommendation when academic performance, language skills, and listening skills are at or near that of their hearing peers. When implementation of a student's self-understanding and advocacy related to personal hearing needs is at an independent level, they will only need to have consultation support. When accommodations are in place and the student demonstrates adequate class participation and attendance, they may only need consultative support. The degree of loss noted on medical reports informs the committee concerning the level of support needed in the classroom. Section 504 may be the protective law that a student needs in order to access instruction in the classroom. When the accommodations include technology support or those accommodations that are easily implemented within the classroom, then a Section 504 plan is sufficient. When specially designed instruction is needed, is when we move towards special education. A consultative visit from a teacher certified to work with students with auditory impairments may be a part of the Section 504 plan and would occur on an annual basis for the purpose of checking equipment and accommodations that are implemented fully in the general education classroom. The Texas Education Agency identifies Northeast Independent School District as one of the regional day school programs for the deaf. Northeast has a shared services agreement with 3 neighboring districts that indicates the provision of services that are specifically for students in those districts when their ARD indicates eligibility for a cluster site placement. This decision is made in collaboration between the 2 districts. Special considerations establish eligibility for this level of support, whether enrolled as an NEISD student or from one of the shared services districts. Questions that will be discussed during the decision-making process include: how is support at the home campus initially considered and then deemed unsuccessful? Does the data support that the student cannot adequately access instruction by hearing alone? Does the data support that the student needs an alternative mode of communication to access language? Is daily instructional support by a certified teacher of the deaf or hard of hearing required? How does the data indicate a requirement for support staff familiar with accommodations and modifications specific to students who are deaf or hard of hearing? Are instructional assistants with a specialty in sign language or access to a sign language interpreter required? Is access to other supports specific to deaf or hard of hearing, such as an instructional specialist, an audiologist, and the regional day school for the deaf speech and language pathologist required? You have heard it said that it takes a village to raise a child. We are that village in the educational setting. There will be students on your campus and in your classroom who have disabilities. Together, we can do this. So take out your cape and let's get started.